All right, hey, we're here with this will be a fun video. We noticed that Tim Ferriss, very popular podcaster, great guy, he hosted Dr. David Spiegel from Stanford University on the Tim Ferriss show, and they discussed hypnosis and hypnotizability. Now, Dr. David Spiegel, Mike, he's a pretty big name in the world of
immense
academia,
credibility.
Right?
Yep.
And they had some discussion that we generally agreed with a lot of it, but there were a couple of points that we disagree with, specifically about hypnotizability, and we wanted to talk about.
And based on our own experience of doing this for many, many decades. Yeah.
All right. So we've got two clips that we're going to roll. They're about a minute long each. We're going to play the audio and then come back and discuss them. Sound good?
Sounds great to me.
All right. So in this first clip, Spiegel is explaining how he views hypnotizability as a very stable trait through the years.
Well, hypnotizability is a very stable trait. Most 8-year-olds are in trances most of the time. As you know, if you call your 8-year-old in for dinner, he doesn't hear you. You know, he's doing his thing. Work and play are all the same thing for kids. I don't know why we try to train them to be little adults, because they have so much fun.
Yeah.
But as we go through adolescence, Piaget talked about developing formal operations in adolescence, where you begin to privilege reason over experience. Mm-hmm. Some of us lose some of that hypnotizability. You don't get as easily absorbed in things. You have to think them through logically first. By the time you're about 21, your hypnotizability becomes as stable a trait as IQ. And there was a study done at Stanford. They did a 25-year blind follow-up to former Psych 1 students who'd had their hypnotizability measured, and the test-retest correlation was 0.7.
Okay, I must say right off the bat, I love it where Dr. Spiegel talks about how we're stupidly training kids to be little adults, which is quite a foreign thing to them, and we agree 100%.
Yeah, 100% on that. Now, he does make some comments about hypnotizability and it being stable. In fact, he says that by the age of 21, that hypnotizability is about as stable as IQ. We don't quite agree with that.
Well, it wasn't the whole point that they came back 25 years later? And
exactly. So they talk about a study where they measured people's hypnotizability. However they did that, they didn't really disclose it. I'm sure it's in their study, but they measure and they use some method and they determine, okay, this is the range of hypnotizability that we have for people.
Right.
And then they tested them again 25 years later and determined that there was essentially no change. The correlation was very high. I think he said the correlation was 0.7.
Well, here's the problem I have with that, Chris. This is what my question is right away. What happened during that 25-year, quarter century? What happened? Was the person attempting to be a good hypnotic subject through that time? Were they going to different hypnotists who use different methods?
Again, I don't believe that they were doing anything to attempt to train the person to be a better hypnotic subject. And now Erickson talks about this, for example, in the collected papers, that hypnotic subjects often get a lot better at being hypnotic subjects with practice.
Right. I think Erickson said that according to Tad James, he said his best subject became his best subject after 300 inductions. And our own experience, when we teach in Toronto live or online or in Las Vegas, whatever, is that we can, by the end of the week, pretty well everybody in the class has learned how to be an excellent subject.
Yeah, and I would say it's kind of like a non-surprise. Why would we be surprised that if we do a certain test on people at one point in time, wait 25 years and give them the same test, that we'll get more or less the same results? It's sort of like if you're a couch potato, and so you're not very athletic and you can't perform very well
active,
fitness-wise or athletic. Or let's say, I don't know, like volleyball, my favorite sport, right? Yeah. If I throw a volleyball at you and you're failing to bump it or failing to set it or whatever, and your crap performance happes in that moment. 25 years later, I throw a ball at you again. Why would I expect there to be any difference? I could say volleyball skills are very static, right? It's
if you don't practice them.
I could I could easily design a study and convince you that volleyball skills are really static and they don't change because I didn't offer you any training. So that's where our major disagreement would be. And Mike, of course, your experience differs with this too, like you just said.
I run into very, very few poor hypnotic subjects to begin with. And we believe that hypnotic learning, learning about hypnosis, learning how to do hypnosis is the key to becoming an excellent subject. Everybody may start at a different point, but everybody can improve their hypnotizability through proper training.
100%. I think it makes a lot of sense that there is a variation. There's a degree of difference between people and how they respond to hypnosis. and they can get better at it, just like they can in almost any area of life. All right, there's one more clip we want to roll for you. It's also about 1 minute long, and in this clip, they're talking about what's going on in the brain. And so let's just roll that, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Hypnotizability, we know what's going on in the brain. We've taken high and low hypnotizables, put them in the functional MRI scanner, and there's an interesting thing that happens only in the highly hypnotizable people, and that is functional connectivity. That is when one region is active, the other region is active between the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is part of the executive control network, the one I'm hopefully using now, talking to you, and the dorsal anterior cingulate. Now, the cingulate cortex is like the C on its ends in the middle of the brain, and the dorsal front part is part of our salience network, the alarm system. It's the thing that if you hear a loud noise, it distracts you. So the salience network is coordinated in highly hypnotizable people with the executive control network, and that makes sense. If they're working together, it's easier to lose yourself in an activity and not worry about whether you should be doing something else. We've actually found also that there's a genetic component to that there's a particular polymorphism of the gene that metabolizes dopamine, catechol-O-methyltransferase.
Okay, that's really interesting. Dr. Spiegel talks about highly hypnotizable people showing different results on a functional MRI.
Right.
And I don't doubt that that's the case. But there's no discussion at all as to what is occurring at that time to trigger this particular process.
Exactly. You would
What is
imagine,
occurring?
I haven't read the study or anything, but I would imagine they're not just sticking people in an fMRI
Right.
and telling them to read a book or something, or
pretend you're hypnotized or
telling them to
whatever.
have a conversation with someone on their phone at that moment in time. I imagine that they're hypnotized at that moment, and they're measuring them while they're hypnotized, right? So that they're getting this difference in the brain. I suppose, though, it doesn't even matter, even if they're not hypnotized.
It's the chicken and egg thing, though, Chris.
Yes,
it is.
Exactly. So we don't know if there's a cause-effect relationship in one direction or the other, right? If you're hypnotizable, highly hypnotizable, according to him, he calls them highly hypnotizables.
Right.
If you're a highly hypnotizable, maybe it's because you've done training to become that way, or you're naturally that way. Similarly, if we say somebody's very strong, and we stick them in a scanning machine and go, oh, they have low body fat and high muscle mass. Well, which
came first?
Yeah, exactly. Some people genetically are more muscular and leaner. Some people go on a diet or strength train, et cetera, and they become that way. So it's not really...
Yeah, have the highly hypnotizables gone through processes of experiencing hypnosis that's given them the different fMRI results.
Yeah, and
which is first.
So we're getting stuck in this idea, this academic idea that, oh, we can measure this thing that proves X. I don't think it proves anything. I think it's just an obvious conclusion that people who can go into trance more effectively
or easily, or
there is a way to measure that with equipment.
I'm hearing that's all I'm hearing here. Yeah. I'm not hearing a correlation with anything.
I don't think it proves in any way that hypnotizability is this static thing. I don't think we're disagreeing with the idea that there is a range.
Right.
But we are very much disagreeing with the idea that it's static.
That's pretty well it for me. Yeah.
So that's our conclusion.
And again,
any closing comments?
Well, just the closing comments. That flies in the face of everything I've done with hypnosis for decades and decades. We believe that we can train people and cause them to become excellent subjects. So we have people on day one think, oh, I can't be a good subject. And by the end of day 5, they're all exhibiting tremendous hypnotic response, and they're getting there very, very easily through practice and proper training.
All right. Other than that, though, we like the podcast.
Yeah,
Tim Ferriss, David Spiegel, great job. We encourage you all to listen to the podcast. It was a good episode. It's fun. You'll learn a few things, and hopefully now you've learned where we disagree.
Thanks again.
And good night.